Welcome to the Fitness Mindset Podcast. My name is Amanda Micallef and I am the head coach and director for Divine Physiques Coaching here in Melbourne, Australia. This podcast is for anybody who is struggling to stick to their fitness journey and is searching for a far more practical set of tools and strategies on how to stay the course long term, because most of you should all know by now that motivation is in fact nothing more than a temporary emotion. What you will learn from any of the guests on the show is that they have all battled with their own setbacks and have had to learn practical means on how to come out on top and succeed. I hope this podcast helps you along your own journey, and I thank you for tuning in today. I believe this is episode number 14. So today I have got Johnoel Esmaquel on the line. So John, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. So John is actually from the Strength and Rehab HQ, based in Brunswick and Thomastown in Melbourne, and he has a Bachelor of Biomedical Science, Masters of Physiotherapy Practice, and is an accredited strength and conditioning coach. So welcome, John.
Thank you very much. How are you going?
Really well, man. Really well. Just sitting in the sun at the moment. So I thought I'd do something different and sit outside for a change.
Definitely.
Make the most of this nice weather at the moment. So yeah, so you've had a pretty crazy morning so far?
Yeah, it has been pretty busy. So no, but got through it, which is good.
Yeah, cool. All right. So look, why don't we just quickly go through why you got into physiotherapy, your experience, what you specialize in, and the sort of clientele that you deal with, and then we'll get stuck into some discussion.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, I didn't really know what I wanted to do straight out of year 12, but I did a kind of degree that would allow me to decide a little bit further on what I'd like to be doing. But I initially had my sights on medicine, and after my final year of the biomedical science degree, I didn't get an interview. So I thought I can't really just stop and do nothing for a whole year before they do the intakes again. So I applied for physio, given that I did really well with anatomy and physiology, was really interested in that. So I thought I'd go along those lines. Still didn't really know what to expect out of physio, but yeah, here we are. I'm about, just over 5 years of experience now. Opened up my own practice a couple of years ago while still studying, still working part-time for another clinic, just to get by. But and then I opened up my second practice towards the end of last year, and that's slowly picking up, which is really good. In terms of what I specialize in, it's predominantly musculoskeletal based injuries, so anything to do with tendons, muscles, ligaments, bones, anything like that. And given the fact that I'm located within 2 strength and conditioning facilities, most of my clients are, from this gym. So mostly physically active people, but obviously through word of mouth and family and friends and stuff, you get a good mix of everything, which is really good. I actually had my first person who called me up because she saw an advertisement out the front, and she's got multiple sclerosis. So that's, it's good to have a bit of a mix of neurological patients as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So what gyms are you based out of? Just so everyone knows.
So there's MPT Transformations in Brunswick, which is on Home Street, and in Thomastown, I'm at Body Revival in Settlement Road.
Yep, cool. And which gym do you find to keep you the most busiest?
Given that I've been at Thomastown for a couple of years now, it's quite busy there. Yep. And then here in Brunswick, as I said, it's starting to pick up, which is really good. Mm-hmm. Kind of a different clientele, but all willing to really get active, and their goals are to, stay in the gym or, run a bit further. And a lot of people are proactive about it.
Yep.
Which I find is the most important thing.
Probably a really good clientele to be working with, especially that, given what you do, exercise is very much the second half of treating a patient. So, I'm sure that those sort of clients would be, you'd see quite a good progress with those clients and like their ailments and injuries and stuff like that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as much as exercise rehab is a really big part of the interventions we use, it's also about building confidence in these clients, because a lot of them, once they're injured, become really fearful of moving. They think they're going to make things worse. And unfortunately, if they don't see someone or they listen to people that have been through the same injuries and they didn't experience anything good from it, then they start to believe these things as well. When, if you just managed it really well from the start, you'd be back in the gym in a couple of weeks, or you wouldn't have to stop going to the gym at all. Things just would have had to be modified.
Yep.
So it's really hard sometimes to have a patient in front of you that's just got some irritation, but their beliefs are that, I can't bend over because my back hurts and I think I'm going to, pop a disc or something like that, because that's a common phrase that's thrown out there. And then that actually makes the sensitivity a lot worse. So I feel that until you can gain confidence, or until the patient can gain confidence, they won't be doing those exercises very well, or they will not be confident in performing them, which means their compliance will drop, and then we're sort of not moving anywhere. So I think it's a very important part of our job as healthcare clinicians to really empower these patients to be able to move, and just reassure them that, they're not going to break down, their bones aren't going to break, they're not going to slip a disc or anything like that.
Mm. All right, cool. So let's discuss now some of the more common gym injuries on patients that you deal with and why you find these tend to happen.
Yeah, I think it really comes in phases, but most of what I've seen have been shoulder injuries, lower back injuries, and probably knee injuries. And then the non-gym related stuff would be like, ankle sprains over the weekend, or just neck pain from people that work desk jobs. But yeah, mainly lower back, shoulders and knees would be the most common ones that I see coming out of the gym. And I think in terms of why these things generally happen, I guess that's where the history from the patient is very important. What had they been doing, even 2 to 4 weeks prior to the injury? If there was an accumulation of training volume. Had they, after the Christmas break, did they completely stop training? And so you typically find that most of the injuries would come if they've just gone from 10% to 100% straight away. They just do too much too quickly, or they're coming back from a break, or they're just like a lot of the clients I see do classes. So they might be consistently going for 5 weeks, and then it's a 12-week block with a 1 rep max testing on that 12th week, and then they skip week 6, 7, 8, and then they pick up where they left off at week 9, and then they injure themselves in that 9 to 12 week block, just because of that inconsistency in between, without slowly building back up again.
Yeah, right. Okay. So someone gets a lower back injury. All right. And I mean, so obviously training volume coming back too hard too soon, that can be like one injury. Then you got shoulders and knees. Let's have a look at the shoulder injury. So shoulder injury I find to be a real common one in the gym, just pec tightness, front pec tightness. In my experience, because I've had the same sort of issue, at first I had this, I was under the impression that you had to do more rowing exercises, because it just, in one's head you think, that would be the smart thing to do because you're counteracting the front muscle, so we're going to work the back. In time I learned it was more about the serratus anterior and strengthening that up. So aside from that, or focusing on that, could you make it known to the audience why pec tightness happens, and obviously how to rehab that inside the gym?
Yeah, I think there's a common misconception about tightness as well, because true tightness means that the tissue will not allow your joints to go to a full range of motion, but quite a lot of people actually feel the sensation of tightness, but then when you actually passively take their joints through range, it still goes the whole way, or it still goes just as much as the side that they don't feel tightness in. So it's very important to distinguish whether it's true tightness or just perceived tightness. Does that make sense?
Sort of, yeah, yep. So, I mean, that's probably the first time I've heard about true tightness and perceived tightness. So maybe just go a little bit into that. Just give a bit of an example around that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, let's take hamstring tightness, for example, because I think a lot of people get hamstring tightness.
Yeah.
So if you've got someone that has done a massive lower body posterior chain dominant session the day before or 2 days before or even a week before, they might start to get this sensitivity in their hamstrings where they feel that if they're continually just sitting down, they feel this nagging tightness in their hamstrings. And then obviously we have to test whether these hamstrings are actually limiting range of movement or whether they're just feeling that tightness but still can achieve full range. So if we look at a toe touch or standing toe touch, or even something like an RDL, an unloaded RDL, you'll find that a lot of these people can still touch their toes, and that's their normal range of movement. You'd ask them, is this the normal range that you usually have? Or are you able to usually put your palms on the floor? And typically you might find that it is their full range of movement, but the tightness is there in terms of what they feel that sensation is, but there's no soreness. So that could be anything from, a lack of hydration or a lack of sleep, or they're very stressed with work. So the body's response is to protect what's maybe already sensitive. And then because of that threat, then it starts to cause this sensation of tightness because it doesn't want you to do anything further to damage it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Whereas with true tightness, you'll find that, if they could normally touch their toes and then you get them to do an RDL or a toe touch and they only can go up to their knees because the tightness is overbearing, and they feel like if they go further that their hamstrings will strain or that they'll tear their hamstrings. That would be true tightness.
Okay, sure thing. All right, cool. So let's go through. All right, if we talk about some rehab exercises to relieve some pec tightness, what would be some of your go-to exercises for a client who does train regularly? Mm-hmm. If we look at it from a strengthening point of view, so that some of that tightness can be sort of, we're addressing the weak muscles more so. Now, would you perceive that as true tightness or perceived tightness?
I guess this is a time where I would challenge that range of motion. So if we can get them warmed up through bench press, and before they start the bench press, they feel that tightness in their chests, and then let's say they can only take the bar down to a couple of inches off the chest, and then after warming up, it's all the way down. Then we know that it's probably I guess it's still a true tightness, but we know that it's influenced by movement as well. So what I would then prescribe is probably some more eccentric type exercises to load up the elongation part of the lift in the pecs specifically. So I would try and challenge their highest level of function straight away, provided that there's no other tissue damage or tissue injury that's happening that's causing further sensitivity. Because a lot of people who complain of pec tightness can also be the ones that find they've got anterior shoulder pain or pain in front of the shoulder.
Yep.
So as long as we can clear that and make sure that there's nothing else going on, then I would I would literally just try and get them to bench press at maybe a tempo, focus on their breathing so that it's not inhibiting those muscles from elongating as much, and using typically lower weights. So that tempo will allow us to increase the intensity of that stretch without actually going really high load, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I don't normally prescribe static stretching. So what I typically find is that when patients come to me, they've either Googled or have been to someone who's prescribed like a door frame stretch where you hold that arm against the door frame and just lunge forward and hold it there.
Yep.
And that can provide some temporary relief from that tightness, but essentially what happens is it comes back. Like that tightness sensation will come back, whether it's, you know, after a few hours or a couple of days. But if you teach these patients that you can actually practice the skill that you're limited in because of this pec tightness, then it allows them to progress not only the skill, but also reduce that sensation over time because you're loading those muscles.
Okay, cool. So you've got your bench press test to test your full range of motion. Static stretching, you're not overly a fan of because it doesn't particularly fix the issue, which is I'm 100% on board with that. So then are you a big fan of mobility? And if so, what mobility drills then would you give to help release that tension in through the front delt? Because if we have a power lifter, for example, who is doing heaps of pressing and not a lot of rowing, obviously the rowing part needs to be sort of brought up, or even potentially some mobility activation to assist in with the row. What then, with the press, give me say 2 or 3 mobility drills that you would recommend someone with pec tightness because of overuse over time.
I think it would really depend on what their current level of mobility is. But if for example, they can do a push-up, which might not challenge their range of movement as much, you might get them doing push-ups off blocks or something like that, just to get a little bit more range through the shoulders. I guess you could typically also use dumbbells over barbells, just get that range, again, through that eccentric portion of the bench position, because mobility is activity dependent, right? So there's kind of no point progressing the range of movement of a joint if you don't use that range of movement at all throughout the day or in your training or at any point in time. So if it will depend on their goals. So if their goal is to become more relieved in that position of bench pressing and to relieve that tightness, then I wouldn't see any point in sort of veering too far away from that, because then we get less of a specific, I guess, transition from whichever exercise you're doing as a mobility drill and the exercise itself. So I'd still stick to some form or variation of a press or the same positioning, but in terms of how it relates to the rowing aspect, if you're very limited through that pec tightness to be able to pull your shoulder blades together and be able to get your elbows all the way back, then I typically program the rows to be after you've done that eccentric component of a bench press, or you've already loosened up that joint so that it's going through its full range of movement. Then start using the row to be able to pull all that weight, so they're actually starting to work within the range of movement that it normally can't get. Now, there's no real quick fix. So you need to be diligent, you need to be consistent, and you need to do this over a long time for those posterior upper body muscles to be able to cope with that extra range, control them adequately. Because it's very typical for trainers to cue their clients to pinch the shoulder blades back during a bench press, right? And if one, you have that perceived tightness, or you have that true tightness through the shoulders and the pecs, you'll have a real, you have trouble pinching those shoulder blades back all the way, because it's never really accessed that range in the first place. So that's where I feel like mobility drills might be important. And I think a lot of people put too much emphasis on mobility drills being very different from the exercise they're already performing. So for example, if we take a squat, right, and initially before you start warming up, you can only get to parallel, but you've already been able to go past parallel during previous sessions, right? If this person can put a barbell on their back and start warming up that squat, do like 5 to 10 sets of increasing load until they work up to their working sets, and then all of a sudden they're hitting their full depth, then I wouldn't even prescribe any other mobility drill if they could do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you also have these patients where they complain, for example, of hip flexor tightness, or they feel like they can't hit that depth because it feels like it's too tight through there, and that can influence their perception of their ability to squat. So because they're aware of that tightness, they just won't push that range. But then you get them into like a 4-point kneeling position, for example, just on their knees and on their hands, and you get them to push their bum back. Most of the time you'll automatically see that their bum's going to go further towards their heels, which is already past parallel with no hip tightness whatsoever. So sometimes I will just prescribe that as a means for them to get comfortable, and to allow them to become a lot more confident that they've actually got the range there. It's just that you need to keep practicing and keep loading over time. That will change.
Yeah.
Because especially for people that sit at the desk all day but are very physically active at the gym, from sitting all day you can just develop that sensitivity at the front of the hip flexors or at the front of the hip. And so to all of a sudden stand and become physically active, you need to let your body adapt to that. And it doesn't take very long, but if you're going straight from work, you finish at 5 o'clock, your gym sessions at 5:30 or 6, you don't really have time to waste, I guess, or you don't have time to just do your warm-up that you're normally used to. For example, I just go straight into the squat if you're able to do that. So I would prescribe that for any joint that they're capable of doing safely, and obviously under the supervision of a coach.
Yep.
So it would be very much the same for the bench press or pec tightness. But going back to the example of cueing the shoulder blades, pinching together, it's just very hard for your shoulder blades to be able to do that if it doesn't have that extra range to begin with. So you'll find that you'd find that as the client will start bench pressing, it might feel really difficult for them to pinch those shoulder blades back in their first warm-up set. And then as they continue to do that, their shoulder blades are more easily accessing the range because you're warming up, and they'll be able to keep them in position for a lot longer.
Yep.
But of course, we need to condition these muscles to be in that position, which I think is where not only the bench press and cueing those shoulder blades back, but doing the rowing exercises to complement that.
Okay, so if I look at my own sort of personal experience in the gym and the exercise I've prescribed for clients, certain mobility drills such as like an incline Cuban press would be one to address like the lower traps and the rear delts. So, I mean, getting into the more isolated muscles rather than addressing the big sort of compound movements such as a row, was kind of like more where I was heading. So more about, like, for example, I might get my client to do a cable punch to strengthen the serratus to help pull the shoulder blade or the shoulders back into alignment. I might get him to do a slow tempo push-up, for example, with a scap. So emphasizing that those scaps scap protraction when they get to the top, again, to really emphasize the serratus. So that was kind of like more where I was heading with that, going into detail of the question of, you know, like I personally am a huge fan of mobility and giving those mobility drills, just because I don't know that compound on top of compound is really going to fix the issue, and cueing the actual serratus, or cueing the shoulder blades back together. You know, how do you go about addressing those small muscles? If we look at the upper back, is there anything else besides a row that you kind of look at? Like, are you doing any external rotation work, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it would be highly dependent on the individual that walks into the door, but the kind of exercise, let's just take it to a specific muscle group, for example. And I don't want to make the assumption that you can actually activate one muscle group while you're doing any form of activity, because there will be other muscle groups activating. But for example, let's take a serratus anterior exercise. 100% you'd be doing cable punches, the push-up with the scap protraction is a very good one as well. What I like to use, because a lot of these people just don't know how to control these muscles. It's not that they aren't activating, but it's just they aren't aware that they're there, right? So for the serratus, for example, I might get them to have a foam roller on the wall, and just place their wrists just like this, and you get them to reach, and at the top of that reach, you want their shoulder blades to kind of move up with the arms rather than just keeping them down. And that's a good drill just for them to be aware of what that serratus does. Mm-hmm. And you can then progress that to something like a half kneeling landmine press, for example. Also a really good serratus anterior exercise, because you get that reach at the end. Mm-hmm. Right. And sometimes if people still can't understand the role of that serratus in bringing those shoulder blades forward and keeping them attached to your rib cage, you can do something like a eccentric face pull, where the resistance itself is going to guide them into that protraction of the shoulders. Because as long as obviously the weight doesn't stop as you're pulling that weight forward, it will just guide them into that position, and then you can therefore just cue them that that's what you want from them. Okay. All right, cool.
Does that make sense? It does, man. It does. Yeah, we'll move on to the next one. Hamstring tears. So I suffered a hamstring tear probably, I'd say, about 8 years ago. So this is more in the early stages of my lifting career. I might have been maybe a year or two into the gym, and I was doing walking lunges weighted with dumbbells, and then I felt like a pop through my right hamstring. And what I've noticed is it's always had a lot of trouble activating, as well as the left side since. And there's also a little bit of numbness there. So it seems to be like a permanent thing. And I think it was a grade 2 tear. So what I want you to do is just to try and really just condense what grades of hamstring tears are. So grade 1, 2, and 3, if that's right. Sort of like the severity of each one, and why it happens, type thing.
Yeah. So grade 1 is more like a minor irritation of your hamstring, a little strain where you might have overstretched, or you get that feeling of a tightness when you're running, and then typically you'll stop because it feels tight. That's probably a grade 1 where it's done no significant damage. You're not limited in range of motion, you're not limited in function, strength is pretty much still there. Whereas with a grade 2, it's a partial tear of the soft tissue. So it could be that, for example, and this is probably an extreme example, if you completely tear one of your hamstring muscles in the muscle group, but the others are still attached, that would be considered a grade 2. And what you'll typically find with the grade 2 is that there's a limited function, or there's a slight deficit in function rather than compared to a grade 1. And grade 3 is a complete tear. So you lose quite a lot of function to be able to use your hamstrings. So it's complete rupture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you go about, sorry to cut you off, go finish what you were saying.
You'll just find that most likely with the grade 3, there'll be bruising.
Okay, maybe I had a grade 3 then, because I had a bruise like that on the back of my hammy. It was pretty nasty. So
Was it high up?
It was pretty, yeah, from memory, it was pretty high up. It was closer to my bum cheek from memory. Yeah. Or it might have been halfway, like it was a long time ago now, but I do know that they've never been the same since. Is that pretty common? Like once you sort of tear it, like right off the bone type thing?
Right off the bone would be, I'd definitely be seeing a specialist about it to see what the management would be from their point of view. But I would typically be seeing people that are in the grade 1 and 2 range, unless they've come back from a reattachment surgery from a grade 3. So
a grade 3 is more you'd need surgery, and grade 2.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily, yeah, basically. But yeah, obviously with the grade 1 and 2, we still have that function that we can work with, and it's more about managing it correctly and being able to restrict their function to what they're currently able to do without stopping altogether, and then gradually exposing them back to the activities that they want to get back to through, again, that education, but also the exercises necessary for that individual to, let's say, start running again, or if they want to go back to soccer or they want to play footy again. So that's when it will become a lot more individualized in terms of the kind of rehab that they would be doing.
Yeah. Can you get some bruising through grade 1? A grade 1 tear?
You wouldn't typically see bruising with a grade 1.
Grade 2?
Grade 2, potentially.
Yeah.
There's some potential bruising there. I've seen some grade 2s that have had some bruising.
Yeah.
But sometimes they've also come back, because sometimes they just perceive it as tightness and not much else. So they'll go see a therapist that might press onto the site of the injury within the first couple of days, and that can show up as a lot of bruising as well afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I think from memory it came up a few days later. I had some like pretty bad bruising. I didn't leave it too long before I saw physio though, and then I had one session. She massaged it out, and then it was pretty much okay. It started to really settle down after that, which I was very surprised, because it was, like I said, the bruise was massive, and it was really painful. Like I could hear that. I felt something just pop. Yeah. So.
So you're not limited in function anymore, are you?
No, well, I find I struggle with Bulgarian split squats a little. So I find that I could put a fair decent amount of weight when I've got my left foot forward. So I could quite easily, have my foot elevated, right foot elevated, and probably do 10 to 12 kilos in each hand for my left. When it comes to my right side, I have to remain at body weight, because it's just one of those exercises where you don't need a lot of weight anyway, but because it is primarily more for stability, and it's with time it has built up, I suppose, the balance between the two in terms of strength. But I still find that this is like, an RPE, say 7 on my right side or an RPE 9 on my right side, might be an only RPE 6 or a 5 on my left. So, just to give you an indication of where they're at, I do feel limited. I do feel limited at times, and still, like, it does slowly get better. But if I don't maintain those bilateral exercises, it does, or unilateral, it does start to play up a bit more. So yeah, it's just one of those things.
Did you get any pain?
I did, look, from memory, I think it was before powerlifting last year or during that prep, it was seizing up. It was before that. So when I had orthotics fitted, it helped a lot. I think my glutes were firing better, or mechanically everything was working better. Yeah, but look, things have been great since then, but they're still not 100%, and I think it's one of those things. Once you suffer an injury or you go through some form of operation, the muscle is just never the same. So, yeah.
Yeah, and two of the major indicators of recurrent strain in hamstrings is age and also previous history of that injury.
Yeah.
So unless you condition it adequately for the purpose of what you're trying to achieve, it's really hard being someone that's physically active, particularly in the gym, because you really want to keep progressing. But with an isolated hamstring strain, it does require you to pull back a little bit, and if it's not adequately managed, or you've stopped conditioning and progressing that muscle in the way that it needs to be progressed before you're hitting something like a compound or like a Bulgarian split squat, where it not only does it have to stabilize, but it has to co-activate with all those other muscles. So if it's not conditioned to do that, even from a regressed exercise, then you're always going to have trouble during that higher level exercise. So you want to kind of increase the tolerance and increase the capacity of your hamstrings at a lower level, and that's where the rehab kind of exercises are really handy, to just load those muscles specifically at a position and at a weight and load that you can actually tolerate and progress over time. Same principles as strength and conditioning exercises, where it's progressive overload, but you're progressively overloading them from a lower level exercise.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
So
it's just about maybe pegging it back a little bit, and it's really hard for me to give the kind of exercises that you might need without assessing you physically as well. But that's where my mind is going at the moment with your hamstring.
I just thought I'd mention some of my little niggles and injuries over the years, just to give a bit of context around what we're sort of chatting about. So, and it's good for me as well, a little bit of good education. But look, like I said, it has gotten better. It's a lot better. And now that I have Bulgarian split squats as a very regular exercise in my program, I found it has improved, but body weight is sort of, I feel like I'm at my strongest with body weight with that. And I don't really feel like they're still activating. I'm still getting a huge pump after it. And I don't feel the need to really add weight at this stage. But yeah, for anyone listening that has ever had a hamstring tear, I'm sure you can understand exactly what I'm talking about and understand my frustration and pain, that you're stronger, but you've always got one side which kind of lets you down. So anyway, all right, cool. So the next thing, so a lot of PTs may or may not perform a movement screen on their clients. I wanted to ask your opinion on an overhead squat test for a PT to use with their clients. So when we're looking from bottom to top, how do you rate it as a screening tool inside the gym?
I think it's very generalized, because it probably doesn't take into account the structure of a client. So if you have a client that's really tall or has really long femurs, for example, they will likely have a terrible overhead squat. So as a general screening tool, it's probably okay, but I don't think you can identify something, for example, as a risk of injury or the ability to perform a certain movement more optimally by just doing an overhead squat. I typically wouldn't use it.
So for a tall person, what would you typically do to assess movement? I
would just get them doing a bodyweight squat, see what their mobility is like. Quite often they probably have less, particularly if there's someone that hasn't been training or they haven't got a long training history. And then they usually have a further forward torso lean and a wider squat stance. And that is generally what is most comfortable for these type of clients. But it's very important to be able to associate their positioning to their actual genetic structure, because a lot of PTs will put a bar on their back and they'll force them to try and keep their torso upright, but they just can't. They can't physically do that. So to them, it looks like it's not an optimal squat, but based on their their own biomechanics and their own structure, it is an optimal squat for them.
For them, yep, for their body weight. Yeah. What about a goblet squat? Do you think that would be way more efficient for a tall person?
Yeah, definitely. I would choose that over an overhead squat, because with the overhead squat, it requires more than just the majority of lower limb mobility. It requires that upper body mobility, thoracic mobility, shoulder mobility as well. Increased balance as well. But yeah, if you're definitely just trying to screen someone, goblet's probably the best way to go, especially if they're not going to be doing any like Olympic lifting.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Because I've had a couple of tall clients in the past, and I've noticed that they do tend to have that upper body weakness significantly in comparison to their legs. Their legs aren't too bad. So it might almost be counterproductive to have them raise their hands overhead only to really fall forward and probably feel a little bit silly, because there is so much weakness there. And generally it's having that poor posture. And it's like, well, we already know your posture's bad. Like, if we can just assess how your hips are moving and your knees are tracking and your ankle mobility, then from your point of view as a physiotherapist, you're suggesting that that's more than enough.
Yeah, certainly. And again, it's very context dependent. So if this person was coming in for like CrossFit or Olympic lifting, it would be a little bit different. But at least if you get them into an overhead squat, you can educate them that, look, it's just your body at this stage that's limiting you. If you practice this, you're more likely to keep getting better. Yep. You have to be really consistent. But if this person is coming in for like a health and wellness program where they just want to be healthy, they want to be in the gym and exercising, I would just split it up. Do your lower body mobility test, whether that's both the goblet squat and like an RDL or deadlift. Yep. And then with your upper body, just do your bench press and an overhead press in isolation to be able to tell that instead. I think it's safer as well.
Yep.
Because I think a lot of PTs will load them up maybe a little bit sooner than they should.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that a lot around commercial gyms especially. So, all right, look, John, if clients want to come and see you, just quickly give me a 1 or 2 minute spiel about how your process works, how you go about your screening, your introduction. And I know it's different for every person, but just I guess whatever your system is around that. And then if they want to book online to come and see you, so now's your chance to basically promote your business. and then we'll just wrap it up from there, because then I've got to run and fly to Ascot Vale and do another client. So take it away, brother.
Yeah, no worries. So what you'd generally find is in your initial consultation, we're going to be talking a lot because your previous history, training history, what your goals are, what your current thoughts around exercise is, your current level of activities. Those are very important into being able to put context into your situation. So I will be talking quite a lot and listening a lot as well. And then would go into a physical screening, which would just, again, be the general mobility drills or assessments that I mentioned in the previous question. And then depending on your goals, we'll be setting up most of the time an exercise program that I will email with goal orientation. So let's say goal 1 wants you to do 2 sets of 10 to 12 reps. Goal 3 is 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps. And this allows them not to have to come to me every week, because you'll find that I think with a lot of healthcare professionals, you'll be seeing them every week for a very long time.
Sometimes a few times a week, just depends.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it depends on the condition as well, but I think that a lot of clients that have come in to me, they haven't needed to be in every week. It's very case dependent, but by me sending this email of the progressions that they can do themselves, it just puts the onus on them to comply to that, obviously. But also so they don't need me to hold their hand throughout the whole rehabilitation. And they've got that sort of self-efficacy to do that themselves. It just educates them to make better decisions and know how to progress in future, because they'll learn a lot of lessons from that. And obviously, if they're having troubles, they can contact me again. And that allows my next consultation, if there is one, to focus a lot more on the education and catching up with them, how they're going, how they're progressing. And if they haven't progressed through their exercise goals yet to the end, then we don't have to change them, because they're still chasing that. Because if you progress them to an exercise that either they haven't been doing consistently or they're not ready to do, then it's kind of no point. So I find that really helps them be on top of what they need to do, because some people will respond with these rehab exercises really well. And if I'm seeing them once every 4 weeks, for example, and they're already an RP3, for example, with one of these exercises, then they have to wait another couple of weeks before they see me for progression. And this way they can progress by themselves.
Okay, cool.
So that's kind of the way that I work with that.
Awesome. So you're at MPT Transformations in Brunswick and Body Revival in Thomastown. So guys, I'll actually link those links below. Or I'm guessing there's just the one website where they can just go onto your business website, and obviously they can choose which gym to book through. So the website is www.strengthandrehabhq.com. I'm fairly sure there's a booking button there. If not, go to appointments, the appointments tab, and there'll be a booking button there. And you can choose which one you want to go to and the times available. Awesome. All right. Cool. Well, John, thanks again, mate, for coming on board today. It was really good to chat about the other side of exercise, I guess. So, it goes hand in hand with exercise. And I look forward to, I suppose, working in conjunction with you in the business this year. So for those of you that don't know, John has been following myself online for a little while. And I just thought I'm going to start a conversation with this guy, and it's been really good. He's putting up some good content on Instagram, so I'll link all of his stuff below so you guys can have a look and see what injury prevention content he's actually putting up. So it's quite good. So mate, thanks again, and we may bring you again on sometime soon. No worries. Thanks for having me. And just really quickly, if the listeners have any questions, I quite often do a Q&A on Instagram story as much as I can. So if they've got any questions that weren't answered in this podcast, they could just wait for that and ask me there. Pretty open to answering all those questions. Sounds really good. Sounds good. There you go, guys. All right, John, until next time, we'll see you then. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you liked the content, please make sure you support the show by giving us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you are the first to know when a new show is being released. I am trying to get up a new show every single week, as I'll continue to bring on interesting guests within the fitness industry who can only bring a lot of value to our listeners. If you're wanting to learn more about coaching with myself, please visit my website at divinephysiquescoaching.com. Thank you once again, and we will catch you on the next episode.